Hello students, welcome back to the day 5 of power sharing. Today we'll complete the chapter. In the previous class, we discussed about the different reasons behind power sharing, and now we'll go forward with the different forms of power sharing. The topics that we'll cover today are forms of power sharing and the difference between horizontal and vertical power sharing. The expectations from today's class are you'll be able to explain the different forms of power sharing. You would be able to distinguish between horizontal power sharing and vertical power sharing. Also, you would be able to define political parties, pressure groups, and movements. Now let's gather the key points for forms of power sharing. What are the different forms of power sharing? How power is shared in modern democracies? What are the different ways in which power is shared in different democracies? So the first way is among different organs of government, like legislative, executive, and judiciary. The second is among different levels of government, different levels from higher to lower level, like central government, state government, and further local self-government. And in Belgium, as you remember, we have studied about another one also, that was community government. The next way is among different social groups. The different social groups also share power, and power is shared among political parties. Political parties definitely share power, and power shared among pressure groups and movements. So the first form of power sharing is among different organs of government. We are already aware the different organs of government. The different organs of government are legislative, executive, and judiciary. So all these organs share power. Legislative is the body which makes law, and executive is the body which implements law, and judiciary interprets the law. Since all these three organs are at the same level, hence they are known as horizontal distribution of power. Their division of power or sharing of power is considered as horizontal distribution of power. Any of these organs can't exercise unlimited power. Each organ checks the others, means each organ controls the other. If legislative wants to become so powerful by making any law, that won't be possible. Executive and judiciary are there to control the power. So all these organs of government are controlled by each other. Hence, it is also known as the system of checks and balances. You can see the last point here. All of them balance each other's power among various institutions. So the power is completely balanced. Any organ cannot become so powerful or cannot exercise unlimited power. Now we are done with the first form of power sharing, that is among different organs of government. Now we have the second form of power sharing that is found in modern democracies, is among different levels of government. So the power is shared among different levels of government. So the first point here in this is two or more levels of government, and this is also known as federal government or federalism. So we have arrangements like central government, state government, local self-government. So these are examples of federal government or federalism. So here we can see that power is shared among different levels of government. We have got a very good example of community government of Belgium. I believe you remember that it had central government, state government, then capital government, and also community government. And this is called vertical division of power because it is going from top to bottom. So it is like vertically power is divided. In this case, Constitution lays down power at different levels. Constitution fixes what would be the power of the central government, what would be the power of the state government, and further other governments. We'll study more about it extensively. There is a separate chapter for this, and that is federalism. So in the next chapter, we'll extensively study about such power sharing arrangement. The next form of power sharing is among different social groups. Social groups are the different groups in society. Like we have seen the ethnic division, Sinhala speakers, Tamil speakers, French speakers, Dutch speakers, German speakers. In India, we have different religion that could be considered as social groups. So all these are social groups. So power may also be shared among different social groups such as the religious and linguistic groups. Clear? The best example is the Belgium model. The community government in Belgium is a good example of this arrangement because you have seen what has happened in Belgium. For all the three different communities, regardless of their percentage of population, shared power. Dutch speakers, French speakers, and German speakers all became the part of this community government. So an excellent example of power sharing among different social groups. In some countries, there are constitutional and legal arrangements whereby socially weaker sections and women are represented in the legislatures and administration. You have examples of reserved constituency. There is a bill also pending in the parliament, that is women reservation bill. You are aware of it. It is still pending, but yes, the arrangement is there. The system of reserved constituencies in assemblies and the parliament of our country is a way of power sharing among different social groups. This type of arrangement is meant to give space in the government and administration to diverse social groups. Such arrangements ensure that no one in a country would feel alienated from the government. Of course, if power would be shared among different communities, among different social groups, no social group would feel alienated. No social group would feel separated. Like in Sri Lanka, you have seen that Tamils felt separated because power was not shared in Sri Lanka. This method is used to give minority communities a fair share in power. So it gives a fair share in power to the different social groups. Now the next form of power sharing is power sharing among political parties. Political parties are extremely important component for democracy. They share power and they strengthen democracy. So, we all know that in a democracy, citizens have freedom to choose among various political parties, various contenders for power. Somebody believes in the ideology of BJP, other believe in ideology of Congress, some believe in ideology of any other political party, and based on that people cast their vote. And in contemporary democracies this takes the form of competition among different political parties. Of course there would be competition. Every political party would try to do the best for the people. Then only people would decide to which political party they should choose. And such competition is in fact very good. Why? Because that ensures that power does not remain in one hand. And in the long run, power is shared among different political parties that represent different ideologies and social groups. For example, we have a coalition government, right? Different political parties form an alliance, means come together and contest election, and they form a coalition government. And in a coalition government, you know that different political parties come together, and different political parties have different viewpoints and different ideologies, and they would represent different social groups as well. Based on that, they would suggest the policies, and eventually the policies which would be made would take care of all the citizens of the country or of a state or of a particular place. So, coalition government is a very good way to share power. Other than this, the political parties who fail to form the government, their role is also very important. What they do, they control the government. They control the government by asking questions. So, whatever steps the government would take, those steps could be challenged by the opposition party, and hence it would improve the decision making. Also, that gives a share of power to the opposition party. Thus, we see that power is shared among political parties. Now, the next form of power sharing is among pressure groups and movements. It's very important to understand pressure groups and movements. First, talk about pressure groups. So, pressure groups are organizations. They are organized. They are organizations who are not the part of the government, but they pressurize the government to take decisions in their favor. The examples of pressure groups are like big business houses, Tatas, Ambanis, student unions, trade unions, farmers associations, industrial workers. All these are example of pressure groups. Let's understand what they could do. They are not part of the government, but they influence the decision making process. For example, let's talk about big business houses. They are financial giants, and any government could not ignore big business houses. So these big business houses pressurizes the government to take financial decisions or different sort of decisions that could favor them. Directly they are not part of the government, of course, but still they pressurize the government, and thus we can say that they influence the decision making process. The industrialists, let's say there are industrialists, the organization of industrialists, they would also do the same. They'll pressurize the government, they would influence the decision making process. They'll not take decision, but yes, they'll influence the decision making process. I am repeating this particular keyword because this keyword is extremely important. So two things you need to keep in mind, that they pressurize the government and they influence the decision making process. Two keywords. Industrial workers, trade unions would go for a strike, and thus they would pressurize the government to increase the wages. The farmers can go for strike and government would take decision in their favor. Now let's talk about movements. So as we have talked about pressure group, let's talk about movements as well. Movements also do the same thing. They are not part of the government. They pressurize the government and they influence the decision making process. Movements could be very small or very big. They are not organized. They are not an organization or permanent organization. They are kind of loose organization. So they are formed for a particular objective, a particular goal. Once the goal is accomplished, once the objective is fulfilled, movement gets over. Let's understand it with a simple example. Let's say in a particular locality, in your locality, let's say, there is no electricity for 3 days. So people in your locality would come on street, go for a strike, and this strike may be supported by opposition party, may be supported by other groups as well. You went on strike and that strike would pressurize the government to take decision as soon as possible, or to fix the issue, whatever the issue is. Eventually what happened, due to strike, the electricity reinstalled, starts working, and once your goal is accomplished, all the people who went on strike would come back. Why would they stay there for strike again? No, the strike would get over. Right? So they pressurize the government for a particular objective. Once the objective has been fulfilled, they return back. The movement also gets over. Fine. So the basic thing that you need to keep in mind after understanding pressure groups and movements, both of them are not part of the government, but they influence the decision making process. Clear? So that is the second point here. Pressure groups and movements are not part of the government, but they share power indirectly. So it is indirect power sharing. They also will have a share in governmental power, either through participation in governmental committees or bringing influence on the decision making process. Sometimes what happens, that government forms different committees for different purposes. Let's say if we talk about a particular scheme like skill development scheme, or skill development, Kaushal Vikas Yojana. You would have heard about it. In that case, the government would form committees to promote at different levels. So several small committees would be formed, and these committees would also act as a pressure group and would pressurize the government to take decision according to the best interest of the people. Got it? So in this way, we see that pressure groups and movements share power indirectly by influencing the decision making process. Although we have already discussed about power sharing by political parties, pressure groups, movements, I have mentioned the definitions here in this particular slide for your convenience. So political parties are a group of people who come together to contest election and hold power in the government. For example, BJP, Congress, RJD, Trinamool Congress, and several other political parties, Pressure groups, we have already discussed. Examples are big business houses, student unions, trade unions. These pressurize the government and influence the decision making process. So these are organizations, like permanent organizations. Movements, on the other hand, are loose organizations which are formed for an objective and influences the decision making process. For example, Narmada Bachao movement, Quit India movement, any sort of movement. We have already discussed an example earlier. I believe you are clear with all these definitions as well for political parties, pressure groups, and movements. We are almost done with the chapter. Now I have put the points of vertical power sharing and horizontal power sharing here with a comparison, and the difference between horizontal and vertical power sharing. Now you do recognize horizontal power sharing is power sharing among different organs of government, and vertical power sharing is power sharing among different levels of government. Got it? So we have the difference put together here. So horizontal power sharing, an arrangement in which power is shared among different organs of government. For example, legislative, executive, and judiciary. And vertical power sharing, already we are clear, an arrangement in which power is shared among different levels of government. For example, union government, state government, and local self-government. In horizontal power sharing, the different organs of government exercise different powers, and this is a concept of separation of powers. So legislative has a different function, executive has a different function, and judiciary has a different function, and this is called separation of powers. However, in vertical power sharing, the whole government is divided into, or the power is shared in different levels of government, and the constitution clearly defines what would be the area in which a particular government would work. The constitution clearly lays down the power of different levels of government. Now let's talk about horizontal power sharing again. It specifies the concept of checks and balances. So if one organ of government is going overboard, taking some decision more than its power, or taking some wrong decision, in that case the other organs controls, and thus we say that it's a system of checks and balances. Okay, so this is called checks and balances. There is no such concept in vertical power sharing. because powers are clearly specified by the constitution for different levels of government. Now let's discuss. You can see this picture that is in your NCERT textbook as well. And the girl is thinking, oh, in my school, the class monitor changes every month. Is that what you call a power sharing arrangement? Think over it. And yes, of course, that is a power sharing arrangement. Why it is? Because it gives opportunity to all the students to share power. So we have completed the journey of power sharing. The chapter ended, and for this particular video lesson, you have the assignment. Define political parties, pressure groups and movements. We already have a slide for that. That's a very easy question. Differentiate between horizontal power sharing and vertical power sharing. Already have a slide. You need to do that. Explain 5 forms of power sharing in modern democracies. Okay, so you need to mention all the different forms of power sharing and explain them. Apart from all these, you would do NCERT chapter end questions. Thank you and have a wonderful day ahead.